begin, I want to thank the people who need to be thanked. I want to thank the Harvard Graduate School of Education, the Inequality in America project run through the Social Science Dean's Office and the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, Ethnicity, Migration, and Rights Program, Act on a Dream, and the Charles Warren Center. Above all, I want to thank Robin McDowell, who has been absolutely instrumental to getting everything to happen for the DACA seminar and also Kesh Kim. It's actually trivializes the amount of work that they have done to say that we would not have been able to do this without them. I want to announce our next two events, I think. On Tuesday, February 20th, we have Dr. Leo Chavez talking about anchor babies and the challenges of birthright citizenship. That's another 4 to 6 event, and that's going to be in the Science Center, Hall D. If you are particularly inspired and you would like a poster to put up in your place of work or residence, I have extra posters, okay? That would be great for us, and you should also get a button. If you leave here without a button, then you have done both yourself and us a disservice. There are buttons on the table outside. All of the buttons are advertising, there you go, with Robin. The buttons are advertising a day-long series of events on March the 5th at Memorial Church, both workshops around art and activism, and then performances in the evening by a number of noteworthy and amazing performers. Monday, February 26th, 3 to 5, in Emerson 305, the impact of TPS repeal on campus, Harvard Workers' Stories. So that's going to be with a number of our workers, our staff, and help us both to, help us really to understand how we can work better in solidarity with them and their struggle, both with the United States of America and with Harvard. This is, if you're going to come to one event other than this event, this is the one. Okay, you can even skip the music on March the 5th if you come to this. The model of this event is a model that I think, I hope takes root at Harvard, and it is a model where academics and university people humble themselves and try to learn from frontline actors and eyewitnesses to history. And I think that we all, speaking strictly for myself, not speaking for you all, have a lot to learn. And so it is my very, very great pleasure to be introducing this event. And I'm looking forward to listening to what people have to say and learning. This is the type of event that I think got both Kirsten and I the most excited about this seminar and about the possibilities for learning and organizing even in these dark times. I'm going to introduce the panel, and then Kirsten Weld, who you'll know as soon as I introduce her in 30 seconds, is going to moderate. Kirsten Weld is the John L. Loeb Associate Professor of the Social Sciences in the History Department at Harvard. She is a historian of modern Latin America who specializes in the history of the Cold War, political violence, and its after effects, especially in Central America and in the Southern Cone. She's also been involved with community organizing around immigrants' rights and labor rights in Connecticut and Massachusetts, and she is a co-organizer of the DACA seminar. Our panelists are the Reverend Walter Coleman. Reverend Walter Coleman has spent 50 years in the struggle in Chicago, from the anti-war and civil rights movement of the 1960s to the Rainbow Coalition organized by the Black Panther Party to the historic election of Mayor Harold Washington. He served as pastor of the Adalberto United Methodist Church during Elvira Arellano's time in sanctuary and worked as an aide to Congressman Luis Gutierrez for 10 years. He is married to the current pastor of the church, Reverend Emo Lozano, who continues to lead the ministry for the undocumented. Reverend Coleman serves as the director of Familia, Latina, Unida Ministries. He holds a Master of Divinity from the Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary and an undergraduate degree from Harvard. Is that right? Where he was a student of our intellectual godfather, Jack Womack. He's the author of Elvira's Faith, The Struggle for the Rights of the Undocumented Families, and Fair Share, The Rights of People, an account of the movement that led to the election of Mayor Harold Washington in Chicago. Let's hear it for Reverend Coleman. Patricia Montes is the executive director of Centro Presente, an immigrant rights organization in Massachusetts. Patricia is recognized as an immigrant rights leader and a tireless advocate for just economic and social policies, including a just U.S. immigration policy. She serves on the executive board of the National Alliance of Latin America and Caribbean Communities, the NALACC, for those of you who are keeping track, and is a board member of the Boston Women's Fund and the Women's Pipeline for Change, a group that is trying to build a sustainable infrastructure to support progressive women of color as they enter, navigate, and move up the pipeline to political leadership. Patricia Montes. And Reina Guevars is the development director of the Student Immigration Movement, an organization led by undocumented youth in Massachusetts. Reina was born in El Salvador and immigrated to the United States when she was 11 years old to reunite with her mother after being separated during the Civil War that took place in Central America. She is currently a junior student at the University of Massachusetts studying philosophy and public policy. Reina Guevara. So I'm going to move this to Professor Weld, who is going to convene.
Great. Thank you so much, Walter, for the, this is really loud, rousing introduction. Maybe I can turn it down. Nope. Nope. Okay. I'll just keep my voice modulated. So thank you all so much for being here. Our format is really to just have a conversation in the round with you all. And so I wanted to begin that conversation by asking each of our panelists just to say a few words about the work that you do, the organizations that you come from, situate for us a little bit sort of what your activism looks like on a day-to-day basis. Maybe we'll start with Patricia and then work that way.
Well, thank you for inviting us, and I'm glad to hear that it's not like, you know, usual to hear that academia had to learn about activism and people that are working directly with people that are being affected. So thank you for saying that. And I think it's mutual, right? Obviously. But Centro Presente have been around for more than 36 years, working mostly with the Central American immigrant community. We were founded by a nun during the 80s in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Since then, we have been working with the Central Americans. So during the 80s, there was taking place a civil conflict in countries like El Salvador. So Centro Presente was funded to support people that were escaping the civil conflict during the 80s. So we do legal services, but we also do organizing political advocacy around immigration.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here and thank you for having me here. My name is Reina Guevara. I am the development director of the Student Immigrant Movement. And SIM is a nonprofit organization located here in Massachusetts. We work predominantly with youth from the ages of like high school to 30. And the way we work is like we do a lot of school presentations where we recruit undocumented people and where we politicize them and mobilize them to fight for the rights of all undocumented people.
That's pretty loud, wow. Okay. Sin Fronteras was founded really by Emma Lozano after the assassination of her brother Rudy in she founded it in 1987, carried on the work that he had done in CASA and other efforts like that, aimed especially at the undocumented. In the year 2000, Emma and Elvira Arellano joined together to organize Familia, Latina, Unida, which was an organization of what they call mixed status families. That is, we had a lot of, they were talking before, there's 6 to 7 million U.S. citizen kids with undocumented parents who have a hold and a stake and so forth, and join with the Dreamers represent 10 million of the front line of where we want to go. So the families, they waged a long campaign, travel and witness and trying to get their local bases together in Chicago and Cook County and Illinois, and then to hook up with other groupings like that. They moved very hard to organize the first of the mass marches in 2006. March the 10th, we had about 700,000 people. It was the largest. It was the beginning of those kind of mass marches that were happening. Then Elvira went into sanctuary. It was the first sanctuary of its type in this time period in 2000 and later in 2006 and through 2007. We continued and we worked with Congressman Gutierrez to form Familia's, the Familias Unidas tour, which went through 60 cities in the United States twice, aimed at both community organizations and but also aimed at especially Latino evangelicals. And it was very, it was, I think, a really, it's an important group that we want to talk about today and some things that we can do there, but there were rallies of 25 and 30,000 people in Tennessee and Texas and different places like that, and that led to be able to force the hand of President Obama through the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and that's how we got DACA. That was they negotiated DACA, and then later a second tour led to the negotiation for DAPA. We're church-based. I'm a pastor because when they formed the church, I was the only guy with a college degree, and they sent me to seminary so they could be legit in the church and stuff like that. And but we now have 4 churches, and around each church there's a Familia Latino Unida membership. We have a youth organization like Fuerza Juventud. We're organized in 21 high schools in Chicago with what we call a youth health service corps. And then the Fuerza also has been really the main strength in mounting pressure and demonstrations and so forth like that. So that's about as far as I can go now. I'm retired, I'm old. I don't know if I got a degree from Harvard or not. I know I got banned from this campus. So I hope they don't arrest me before I get out of here. And I think Jack got me a degree finally.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. So, what is your reaction as frontline activists to this moment that we're living right now? How do you how can we take the temperature of this sort of looming disaster that just seems to unfold and worsen day after day after day? How do you respond to that? How do you work with it?
Who wants to start? Well, I think that it is a disaster, but I think that we had to realize that we were facing, immigrant communities were facing a crisis before Trump. And it's something that is very important for us at Centro Presente. Actually, I had 3 points here, and one of them is that we hope that we understand that our problems as immigrants, right, and our problems with our immigration system did not start with the Trump administration. Criminalization of immigrant workers, privatization of worker center, detention centers, and many other things were there before, even before Obama. And I think that disaster that we're seeing right now is the result of the legacy of multiple administrations, right? And actually, who here knows, not the panelists, not the professors, when the U.S. system was reformed the last time? When the immigration system, the U.S. immigration system was reformed, officially reformed the last time. It was in 1996 during the Clinton administration. And that gave us a lot of problems. I mean, people are right now, ICE is now working with the police at the local level, and it's also working with states. Excuse me, but that's what happened during that time, 1996. So I think that we're seeing right now, of course, is the result of that, the legacy of all these administrations. And of course, I'm not going to deny the fact that what we're seeing right now is like the extreme right in power, right? Doing awful things against people, and with that extreme level of racism against people of color and against particularly against Latinos, immigrants, people that are brown, right? And I think that, yeah, that's my reaction.
Personally, I have only been undocumented, and it's a long time, 15 years. And well, four of those 15 years I have received DACA. And at SIM, we have been like debriefing on how like DACA also helped create the momentum that we are right now, where it's sort of a game where they're asking to basically exchange one group of people for the other group of people. And so for us, it's like, okay, like how do we strategize into being more intentional about when we do our narratives, for example, of being undocumented young person in America, we don't criminalize the other population. We don't want to reinforce the argument of like the good versus the bad immigrant, because that is also why, and I don't know if I can share a little bit of my mom's story. So my mom is a TPS holder, and a month ago I was asked to be in a documentary. And I asked my mom if it was okay for her to be in the documentary with me. And then she's like, I thought she was gonna be like, no, because I'm gonna lose my TPS, and I have a deportation prior to having her TPS, so that's gonna reopen. And the first thing she tells me is like, what are people gonna say about me? Like, she's been here for this long, she doesn't even know English, she hasn't accomplished anything. And so I was like, it hit me. I was just like, this is what my narrative, like, oh, I'm a good dreamer who goes to school, who, learn English, who's advancing in life, does to people like my mom who feel like they're inferior. And who feel like if I get deported, then that's fine. And I'm like, no, it's not. Because your value is, it's not as what you, as the profit you bring to America, but your value as a human. And so as in first of all, we are focusing on like healing, because we are in a place where our community is scared, our community is losing hope. And so we are really focusing on having spaces where people can gather and like talk about the trauma of like being exploited, of being a woman, being an undocumented woman. So yeah.
Slim, what do you think?
Can I actually, maybe if you two just sort of sit back a little bit and then we can all see each other a little bit
Yes,
better.
that's
Yeah.
better, yeah.
Excellent. All right.
Yeah, well, first, it's good to be here, and what's been done in Boston in terms of TPS has really have been exemplary, and has moved the issue more out of Boston and nationally than out of anywhere else. It's been some really good work that's been done here, and we're always appreciative of what this represents here with Centro and the other groups that I don't know as much about, but I'm sure they're very strong and important here. Since in our churches, we're fighting a lot of cases and a lot of different kind of cases. Whether we have 4,000 DACA applicants, they're up against it now. You had the people who were not eligible for DACA. We got a case now in federal court because the guy was on a young brother in the church was on a gang index list in Chicago. He wasn't in a gang. He had two cards filled out on him. One said he was a Latin king, and the other said he was a maniac disciple, which is kind of impossible to be both and stuff. So, but there are a lot of specific things. We have 3 mothers in sanctuary, and who had been in a situation of low priorities, but checking. So that was the first group they went after because they had them. They came right to them, fell into their arms, and they moved to deport them very quickly and stuff. So we have a lot, and then we have a green card veteran from our church. Did 2 terms in Afghanistan, came back with a brain injury and, what do you call it, PTSD, ended up homeless, went up with a partner of his that he knew when he was a kid, and the guy convinced him to go deliver from this car to that car some dope, got bested in a sting, did 7 years in the penitentiary, and thought he was a U.S. citizen because they promised him he would be when he went into the service. But was informed 2 weeks before he was going to get out of prison that he was going to be deported because they'd revoked his green card status. So within the church, we have a lot of cases like that. And they're coming up, every 2 weeks or 3 weeks in one version or another. And some were kind of at the end, and you go to sanctuary or different things like that. But after the Trump, the day before the Trump election, no matter what we warned people about it, told people there was a great expectation. There was going to be a leap forward. People said, well, look, we struggled, some of those families had struggled for 10 or 15 years. And they said, we're going to get there now. You know, we're going to get through this. You know, they wasn't asking for big stuff, but they would get the rock, the boulder off their shoulders and stuff like that. So since there's not only been the fear, but there's been great disappointment. Fear is not so hard to work through. We know how to do that. We do it every day, I think, all of us. But disappointment's harder. And there was a great disappointment that we felt, you know, within, especially those groups of people. So we've had to work through it. And then all of a sudden, I think really because of the popular base that had been built in this country, Trump had to pull off this deal with DACA and set up this little setup game with DACA that they're putting us through. I want to say that in the midst of all this, probably the most encouraging thing that's happened is this. The DREAM Act, which was introduced by Senator Durbin, Illinois, was really introduced first as an alternative to legalizing everybody. And then as they went into the balance piece here, and that's how Durbin played it. We're not going to get this, but we can get the DREAM Act. And sometimes they added on ag jobs. And it was really an attempt to split and to play off the youth against their own parents. And the youth that said, well, no, we can get you, but we can't get your parents. You didn't do anything wrong. They're criminals. You know, it really got very ugly. And it, you know, we fought for it, and sometimes we'd swing back and say, well, let's just get the DREAM Act passed so we can get it over with. That was very difficult to do. We passed it one time through the House and couldn't get it through 60 votes in the Senate. So with all that and all the struggle that went on and discussion and so forth, and we've seen a generation of young people grow up in the midst of this from the time that they're 9 or 10 to now they're 21 and 22. Remember, the big migration happens really after NAFTA and Mexico and stuff like that. And so the kids, you know, whether they were born here or brought here, were 2, 3, 4 years old. You know, so, well, now they're 18, 19, 20, 25 years old. They're adults. They know what's going on. They've been in the middle of it. And I think, I know that some things happen in different parts of the country. I know they happen here. But I thought the most encouraging event was Nancy Pelosi calls a big press conference about how she's going to get DACA passed and save everybody. And invited some of the Dreamers to come, you know, stand behind her and say, yay, Nancy. And they took over the press conference and said, no, Nancy, it's not going to go down like that. We're not going to be used as a pawn to be able to deport our parents and the rest of the 11 That was an important move. It spread like wildfire across the country and set the basis for this last struggle. And I raised that within the context of the question you asked. It'll lead us into some of the specifics here, but most important because how do you sustain a struggle? You know what I'm saying? In our family, so we go back, you know, we first started this in 1969, 1970, and so this is a long time, you know, with a lot of ups and downs, a lot of defeats, a lot of discouragements, a lot of almost there, you know what I'm saying, and a lot of broken families and ruined lives. And all in the context of the United States securing its last bastion of financial imperialism in Latin America. And we know that everything is part of that, where we're going to go with it. So through all that, how do you sustain it? It's really, the truth is, it's just like a church. If a church doesn't get the sons and daughters to come into the church, it's a dead church. It's got to be the next generation that comes up and picks up the struggle in its own terms and in its own way that makes it possible. It doesn't make those who were there before irrelevant. They're important. They got experience. They got numbers. You know, they're millions. But that move, I think, by the Dreamers, really in California, that spread across the country, has brought people's hope back a lot. It's brought people's hope back a lot. I don't think anybody has any faith in what's going to happen in Congress here, including the Congress. But in terms of the movement, it's really the next generation taking a very principled position. I think that has helped us fight through the discouragement.
What's the relationship, how do you guys see the relationship between these different generations of activists? Because, as Lynn points out, this has been going on for a long time, and yet a lot of the folks on the forefront, because of the particular nature of DACA, the people who get the most press attention are young people, and that's a useful thing that they can leverage. But I'm sort of interested in the behind the scenes, right? Behind the kind of public narrative of Dreamers. What kinds of relationships have there been between, particular churches or particular organizations that have been around for a long time and newer organizations? Is there a sort of intergenerational transfer of knowledge there? How does that work?
For us as SIM, I just got hired, by the way, 4 months ago with them to be the development director. And what happens is when leaders start, they're young and they work their way up. And so based on what they had learned throughout their time at SIM, once they transition out, they make sure they teach you everything that has worked and things that have not worked. For example, when I entered SIM, the whole narrative of blaming our parents was happening. And one of the lessons that I got from that, from former staff then, was to not make the same mistake. And so for us, it's useful to have, we also have a board that is composed of people who have previously been paid staff or something, who guide us through the process of if we're gonna do a campaign, how will this affect not just us, but the community in general. And so for us, it's useful to keep the people who have makes them happen and make the legacy it is now, to still mentor us in our work. Because it is important for us to learn the lessons they learned, the tactics that didn't work, the tactics that work, and how to move forward for now, specifically now, and during this time where we're sort of in a space where we don't know where to go, because a lot of the tactics that had previous work, like to stop deportations or to arrange campaigns, it's just it's not working the way we want it to. And so it's for us with them to form new tactics that, Reverend says, that, create a future where there's hope. Because the reality is we're not going to sit there and say that we are going to fix or try to change a lot of what's happening right now, because it's just impossible. But we can try to give people hope of what organizing does, and what, training the people who are being affected, undocumented people, to be part of the spaces and form those policies they want to see implemented in their communities.
I think that we have a lot of work to do around that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, unfortunately, we are working on silos over there, and we know, the leaders, but I think that we had to do more work connecting our bases, right? Connecting, for example, the Dreamers with people from Central America that had TPS. Because it's not just, I think it's important to create spaces where people can share their personal stories, but also learn about our own history, right? Because El Salvador during the 80s is not the same El Salvador right now. And during the 80s, there was the civil conflict. Right now, I imagine that you're at Harvard, right? Honduras and El Salvador are the second most dangerous places in Earth after Syria, right? Honduras is the most poor country in Latin America right now, according to the UN. Most of the undocumented immigrants that are living in the U.S. Right now are Mexicans, but most of the ones that are trying to cross the U.S. and Mexico border right now are from Central America. Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, and violence is the number one reason that is pushing people to come to the United States without proper documents. I think it's important to exchange, as I said before, personal stories, but also what is going on right now in El Salvador and Honduras, and learn about the history, right? And also learn about the U.S. responsibility in our own problems. Because that's another point that I have, that we usually, when we talk about immigration in the U.S., we just talk about, DACA, TPS, detentions, deportations. I think it's important to talk about that. But every single thing are symptoms of something bigger, right? Of an economic and political system that is in place to oppress people, not just in the U.S., but also in our own countries of origin. And I'm so glad that Reverend mentioned NAFTA. Yeah, it's also about CAFTA. It's also about all these international economic policies that the U.S. have been implementing in migrant-sending countries like Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, and many others for decades. Decades that have been, destroying local economies in our own countries of origin. Usually when I go to panels, people say, no, just talk about immigration, just talk about detentions, talk about deportations. I'm sorry, I can't do that. We had to talk about that too. We had to talk about the legacy of the U.S. policies in Latin America and hold this government accountable. Of course, we also need to hold accountable our own governments, because at this point there is a lot of corruption and impunity in our own countries of origin, right? We also need to hold accountable our own governments. It's not just about the U.S. It's also about. It's not about ideology. It's all left and right. As Galeano said, el mundo está patas arriba, right? With la izquierda, la derecha, and whatever. But I think it's important to create those spaces and talk about personal stories, but also about what is going on what is our political environment, the role of the U.S. government, history, and the role of our own governments.
Let me follow up on that. There are 2 or 3 points in here that are kind of critical in terms of our communication with each other from different cities and places, and both inside and outside the United States. Actually, I was here with the professor and this young man right here. We want to start a new project that was similar to the South Africa Now project in the 80s. With basically, at that time, it was to educate young African Americans to the situation in South Africa and Africa. And I think we have a desperate need to educate a next generation of Latinos to the realities of their parents' countries of origin. I think that's it's a critical role we have to say. And if the immigration issue is as phrased as people come here for the American dream, and if we think they're worthy, then we'll let them in, or we'll try to figure out how many we'll let in. But when Elvira was in sanctuary, they asked her, "Did you come here for the American dream?" She said, "No, I didn't come here for the American dream. I came here for what the American nightmare did to my pueblo." And her history, which I hope somebody pays $10 and buys my book, her history was really defined by NAFTA and the devaluation of the peso and being moved from one place to another to send money back to her family, and finally crossing the border following her brothers in order to survive. It was a forced migration. And I think, the addition now of the violence, which was, what was it brought? It was brought about by drugs that came from this country and guns that came from this country and a market that comes from this country. So the violence there is supplanted, I think, a lot of the economic issues in terms of destabilization. But it's a forced migration. Then this country, our argument becomes that this country has a moral obligation to the families that were formed here and the children that were born here, because it was a result of a forced migration. That's the argument that we should be making. And it's been very difficult even to get our best elected representatives to make that argument, because the American dream argument seems to fly better, which was part of the reason why you could divide the dreamers from other people and stuff like that. They put them in those terms and stuff. So I think the project to develop really a popular, we did a survey. We didn't hit all 4,000 dreamers in our organization here, but we hit about 2,000. Say how many could name more than 4 countries in Latin America? Only about 10% could name more than 4. Name, you know what I'm saying? Nothing else, just the name and stuff like that. And you look at the American educational system, there's nothing. It doesn't exist in terms of Latin America. So in terms of identity, in terms of the political formulation, in terms of where we're really going with this movement, that's very critical. I think secondly, when we talk about the relationship between the generations, you have to talk about it in different terms. In the churches, we have 4 churches. One's primarily Honduran, one's primarily Guatemalan, and the other 2 are primarily either Mexican or mixed Mexican and Puerto Rican. You can see the relationship between fathers and sons and mothers and daughters and so forth like that. It's a pretty smooth transition. I mean, there's normal stuff, you know what I'm saying, in terms of tensions with teenagers and what they're going to do with their lives and stuff like that. But basically, in terms of the movement, it's a good transition. It's smooth, it's natural, it's normal. The parents are proud of their kids standing up for them. The kids are proud and aware of the sacrifices their parents made because they're involved in that struggle with them and stuff. And it's a very healthy thing. I think that's true kind of overall generally. But I think that organizationally, it's a whole different phenomenon here, and it's something that we really have to look at. You know, I'm old, so I come out of a time when an organizer, if he got $15 a week, they say he was a sellout. You know what I'm saying? The movement was not a business. Was not a business. You didn't go to college and then get a job as an organizer and negotiate your salary and have insurance and pension plans and stuff like that. The amount of money that's been poured into not-for-profits on the immigration issue is overwhelming. Is overwhelming. There's probably not as much corruption there as there is in some other areas, but there's a lot of corruption there. But the corruption is more insidious. A lot of the reason that we can't make the arguments that we want to make and do the things we want to do is because really the funders control this movement. We got to be honest about it. The funders control this movement. The guys will come and say when you finally, you know, because I'm old and been around with them, and they'll say, yeah, well, you know, man, we'd like to take that position, but hey, that would cut the money, man. We can't do that. And directly in at crucial times, critical times, meetings are staged, and all of a sudden funders have talked to this and this, and you look around the room and some kind of agreement has been made with a third party that you don't even know about, and things get sabotaged and go down the drain. What is the organizational model? What are we following now? You know, we had, you know, coming out of the black community, we had the transition from the civil rights organizations to the kind of black empowerment organizations like the party and stuff like that. And then they went the same kind of route into politics and not-for-profits and really lost a lot of the spirit of resistance and the ability that they had before. The Latino transition has been even quicker from nowhere to not-for-profits. It's a business. And that's probably the biggest danger that we face. Within that context, the tension between the dreamer organizations and the organizations that were based on broader utilization, were more family-based, is big. There was big tension there because they're competing for funds, guys. It had nothing to do with what's up here or what's in their heart or what the right tactics are. This is competition for money. And, you know, within each, you know, this dreamer organization, who's got the grant, who's got the money, what's it happening and stuff like that. Whole coalitions fight with each other. You know, I was with, I went in between Pat's network and this other group, the DC-based network and stuff like that. It was vicious. And what was it about? The Ford Foundation. The Ford Foundation. It wasn't about what was going on in Arizona. It was about money from the Ford Foundation. In 1967, if somebody had a meeting with the Ford Foundation, we shot him. He said, you must be an agent. You know what I'm saying? And now they're openly competing. You know what I'm saying? To see who's going to get the money, and that created big divisions. So I think there's some problems that we've got to work through in terms of the force and importance of the new generation coming into the movement and finding its place and its leadership within the movement. It's very exciting. But I think the problems go back to the organizational forms we're using. We're not really membership-based for the most part. We're board and staff-based and funding-based, and that's dangerous. You don't grow, you don't spread, you don't become a mass movement. And you know, the ability that we had in 2006 and 2007 to be able to put the largest street demonstrations in the history of this country together were not put together by the not-for-profits. They resisted it. They fought it. They said it's not right to do because it's not controllable. You know what I'm saying? When we turned it over to the DJs in cities after cities, they said, oh, they don't want to turn it over to the DJs there. They're crude. They use bad language. We don't want to talk with them, but it's a question of control. So the issue of how are we going to be organized in this next phase of the struggle, I think, is a critical issue that we've got to address in terms of the generations. We got to work it. We got to work that issue through to get unity.
Yeah,
I just want to say that I'm 100% with him when we talk about, even when I am directing a nonprofit in Boston, but that's what happened, there is like a lot of disagreement, a lot of disagreement between, nonprofits, especially the ones that are in Washington speaking for us, that are not necessarily connected with the people, they are not grassroots, they are advocates that are not necessarily connected with the people that are affected. And that is also happening at the local level. It is happening. And as the Reverend said, it's about, fighting for money, media attention, fund, everything. And to give you an example, I received a phone call, I think it was yesterday, from a journalist who said, they are making some changes to the Safe Communities Act. Do you know about that? And I said, no. But can you comment? And I said, well, I don't even have the copy of the language. How was that process? And the journalist asked, do you know how the immigrant community is going to react to those changes? And I said, I had no idea, because I don't think that the community have a say on that process, right? Because nonprofits, right, that are working for the community, not with the community, are already making decisions behind doors at the State House with politicians that are not necessarily, right, communicating or having a conversation with the immigrant communities. They are already making decisions for us. And the other thing is that, problem with foundations. Foundations that are talking about social justice, but they don't really care about social justice. And I can say it publicly, right here, the Boston Foundation, the Bar Foundation, I'm sorry, but you're not supporting the community. You're not putting a penny. And if you do, they tell you what to do, and hey, that's not what we want you to do, right? And the other thing is that, unfortunately, some of these organizations are also in bed with the Democratic Party, right? And I'm sorry, but the Democratic Party, in our opinion, is also part of the problem. It's part of a structure that have been oppressing people in the U.S. and also outside of the U.S. So I'm so sorry, but that is happening. That's why we don't have anything in Massachusetts changes. I'm so tired when I go to the State House or panels and people say, we're here in Massachusetts, we are very progressive. We're not. When we talk about immigration, I'm sorry, but we're not a progressive state, at least on immigration. We don't have licenses for undocumented people. We don't have in-state tuition. Texas does, Miami, Florida, right? Oklahoma, and we're done. So let's have the real talk, right, about what are we doing here in immigration. And I'm 100% with you, because talking about funding, foundations, as the Reverend said, have been giving millions for a strategy that to reform the immigration system, and look where we are. And our organizations are trying to move a progressive agenda with our fingers, because sometimes we don't have money to pay enough to our organizers, right? And I think that's very unfair, Yeah. So So I'm sorry, but.
No, it's completely, it's
That's the comment that I have, yeah.
from someone that works on the outside, like I was a leader for SIM, and then I now fundraise for SIM. So I had to write grants, I had to meet with foundations, and sort of grasp everything that happens internally in terms of like how nonprofits, organizations work. It was a bit shocking, because to me, it was like a lot of the foundations, my thoughts on it were they actually wanted to ask to create that change and move forward, but it's more, okay, how many people you organize? How many people are here? I'm like, okay, but that doesn't create sustainable change, right? And it happens because if you don't mobilize people or organize people or do an action that appears on live TV or anything like that, then you don't get the funding. But then you question as to, okay, if you're appearing on live TV, what is that doing for my community? What is me organizing people with no aim doing for our communities? It's just organizing people for what? What long-term solutions are we working on? So, yeah.
So what is the work that you're all doing that doesn't get attention and should? If you could kind of rewrite, flip the script, what is the sort of highest impact work that gets the lowest media attention, the lowest visibility, and what's the sort of relationship there?
With Centro, we have a leadership development school that is basically political education, right? to have a conversation with our members, because it's not just about educating the general public, the non-immigrant community, the media about root causes of forced migration. We also have to do that work with our members, because people say, yes, we come because we're poor, because poverty, violence, but poverty and violence doesn't come from the sky, right? So we need to have that conversation, right? And we're trying to develop the critical thinking of our members and talk about NAFTA, talk about GAFTA, talk about the Civil War, what was the role of the U.S. during that time, and all that kind of stuff. We don't receive a lot of funding for that. In media, if we're talking about capitalism, they don't really care. I don't want you to talk about that with your members, right? So, and I think that's the word that is actually very important for us, because advocacy around TPS and many other issues is extremely important. But without having that deep analysis and conversation with our members, is very hard, because now we're going to show a video about a campaign that we have on TPS. But it's not just about asking for residency for people that have TPS, for example, right? It's also about understanding what is going on right now in El Salvador, in Haiti, and Honduras, and are our countries ready to receive all these people? Our governments are lying. They are saying that they are ready. How can you say that you're ready in El Salvador to receive people that have TPS if El Salvador, according to the UN, I have in my notes, right? This is the UN saying, it's not me, it's not Centro. There are 300 people from El Salvador living in a daily basis, right? This is the UN saying that data. How can you say that you're ready to receive people with TPS? Everybody here knows what TPS is, right? Okay, nice. So the Honduran government also lying that actually, I don't know if you know, but it's a dictatorship that is taking place in Honduras right now with the full support of the U.S., right? So there are, according to the UN, 100,000 individuals living annually in Honduras. How can you say that you're ready to receive people with TPS? You're not. You're lying, right? So can we show our video now? So this is not like... Oh, that's the leadership? I think it's better if we show the TPS video after. Okay, so can you put it the other one? Sure. Okay. That's is shorter than this one. But if you want to see this video, you can watch this video, you can go to our website. But thank you, Jenny. So the other one is about TPS, a campaign that we have on TPS. Can we show it now? Yeah. Oh, perfect. All right.
My name is Brandy Guerrero. I'm 18 years old and I'm a U.S. citizen. Both my parents are covered under the Temporary Protected Status, TPS.
My name is Gabriela. I am 10 years old and my mother has TPS.
It was on before. We tested it. It was like very loud, actually. This is the lights.
Yes.
Yeah, these are the lights. How can we get the volume up?
It should be on that white panel.
White panel.
No, on the in front of you.
Oh yeah. Look at that.
Does it say program?
No.
You don't see program volume?
Nope. Oh yeah, there. Is that the volume?
Yep.
My name is Brandy Guerrero. I'm 18 years old and I'm a U.S. citizen. Both my parents are covered under the Temporary Protected Status, TPS.
My name is Gabriela. I am 10 years old and my mother has TPS. I am a U.S. citizen and I go to Francis Drake Elementary School in Leominster, Massachusetts.
I have many dreams, and one of them is to become a neonatal nurse in the intensive care unit. But in order to fulfill this dream and further my education, I need both my parents' guidance and support.
When I grow up, I want to be an ESL teacher for students who do not speak, read, or understand English. In order to accomplish my dream, I need my mother and family.
For this reason, I have joined with the organization Centro Presente to fight for permanent residency for everyone with TPS.
I think that other kids, teenagers, and young adults need their parents and family to reach the dream too. Teenagers and young adults with family with TPS may not have accomplished what they have wanted because their family may not be with them. In order to accomplish our dreams, our parents and family need residency, not just TPS.
I also invite children with parents with a TPS to come join in the struggle and fight for our parents' permanent residency.
He'll be back. All right, we're just gonna keep it rolling without it.
He went to the bathroom.
So great. So two things that come up in terms of the video and this question of sort of what gets attention and what doesn't. And one of them is, obviously the relative invisibility of TPS in comparison to DACA, even though we're talking about comparable numbers of people affected, right? That's one. Two is the sort of hiving off of TPS from the Dreamers, right? So there's, this is where your Democratic Party narrative really runs aground, because there's all of this, all of this chat about DACA, and yet and wanting to ensure the success of these young people, and yet how are these people going to be able to succeed when their families are being arbitrarily torn apart for no reason, right? But then the third thing is also, I think, a lot of the public conversation about DACA and TPS, to the extent that the TPS conversation exists, is this sort of very minimalistic definition of what are our goals, right? So it's like, we want to preserve DACA. No, we want a permanent residency status. We want a path to citizenship, and not one that takes 12 years or 14 years or these other nonsense proposals. What do you do to get that message out there? What is the sort of work involved in trying to kind of amplify this idea that this is not just about another contingent status, another reprieve, another temporary Band-Aid solution, but something that goes much beyond that?
I want to come, I missed my turn. I want to come back.
Yeah.
I won't do it right now, but I do want to come back about two things that we're doing in Chicago probably that are different and not happening other places as much. But on this issue, look, our goal is to survive. Our goal is long past when we had some pie-in-the-sky idea of legislation that would make everybody citizens and stuff like that. We fight day by day and month by month to stop from being torn to pieces here and criminalized and everything else. So that's the truth. Look at where we were. Our folks in D.C., which are not just a strange group, but anyway, we had jumped on Durbin. And when Durbin and Lindsay brought their proposal to the president, when he said, "Why are you bringing me all these shit, whole country people and stuff like that?" You know what was in that proposal? It was a road to citizenship for the Dreamers. It was an extension of TPS for 5 years, and it was a 3-year legalization for the parents of the Dreamers. That was pretty good stuff, and we had the leverage. We could have shut down, we did shut down the government, we could have kept it shut down, we could have kept them, we could have thrown the whole international capitalist economy out of whack by not approving the debt ceiling and stuff like that. And they closed it down for 2 days and lost their nerve. That's, but the truth is, those kind of negotiations are not really legislative. We win things not, the reason we, after the failure of the House to even take up the Senate legislation in 2006, that's when we began to move on the president for executive action. And that's really our concept. We have a concept of sanctuary, which is not necessarily about a church, but our goal is to survive and to be conscious and to grow stronger. You know what I'm saying? And when different opportunities, political opportunities present themselves, let's take them. You know what I'm saying? But first is to build our movement and our people and our organizations to be able to protect them and defend them as much as possible, and to have them grow in terms of understanding who they are and how they're organized and stuff like that. So, we all have problems with what happens in D.C. On the other hand, it's important for us to know what happens in D.C. We have to be on top of it and be able to move it and stuff like that. The TPS question, it depends on where you are in the country. Boston, because you had such a Salvadorian population here, was a natural to move on that question. We probably were not that involved, a little bit. I would joke with folks, whenever you have a group of 1,000 Mexicans, it's always about 5 Salvadorians to do all the work. So they push very hard, to move that issue, and we've had our congressional representatives move on it pretty hard, and we take a lot of cases and so forth. But it depends on where you are. So when we, through a series of activities and things that we got involved in, ended up forming a Honduran church of about 600 people in Waukegan and what had been a little nascent Honduran community, then all of a sudden TPS is very important. You know, it comes from the base, and our bases are in different places. And for us to be able to communicate better, sometimes we need to get the base as opposed to the organizers together so that people can interchange and understand that. But again, part of that is the process of conscientization so that we look at ourselves, I mean, something really, out of all this, something miraculous has happened. If you look at TPS or DACA or these different things and stuff like that, the dream of a Latin American unity against the Northern imperialists, which never really got put together very well on the continent, has happened in the United States. This idea of a Latino, that's an amazing concept. It took within really a very short term, there came to be a sense of a common identity now which can be worked with and grown and so forth like that. So people are responsive, I think, within the community, responsive to GBS as soon as it's raised. It depends on where the base is. I did want to say my two things. Can I do that? Yeah. Okay. When they came up with Obamacare, Obama and the Democrats who talked a lot about their concern for the undocumented made it very clear that they were excluding illegals from Obamacare. And I think that if we are going to build the movement that we have, we not only have to deal with legal problems of criminalization and mass deportation, we got to deal with survival. What we have is we have a program where we bring medical students and nursing students who come in we're in 21 different high schools. They teach the students about how to recognize and to understand the 5 basic diseases that we need prevention on. And we start by saying there's a 20-year life expectancy gap or a 20-year death gap between our community and others because we don't get early detection and treatment of treatable disease and so forth. So after that happens, then each student is responsible to bring 10 of their families and neighbors through screenings in all 5 areas. And then to follow them to fight for access. And we changed things. You know, out of that came, we had 9 undocumented folks that needed transplants, and they couldn't even get on the list. It wasn't legal to get on the list in Illinois. So we changed, you know, we set up we forced through a series of demonstrations and sit-ins and marches to force the hospitals to come together and set up something that would actually deal with that and actually change the law in the state of Illinois. I think that we have to look at other issues that relate to the survival of our community, even though we're compelled to fight with issues of criminalization and mass deportation. And healthcare is one of them that we should be moving. And I think this idea of we have about 2,400 members of the Youth Health Service Corps. They know what they're doing. They're changing people's lives, and they're holding their community together and stuff like that. And they go to Cuba every summer, they go to Haiti and stuff like that, and so they're learning within their own experience about that. The second thing is the whole question of the church. The Catholic Church has always been difficult to deal with on these issues. And slow to move. When Elvira went into sanctuary, we had, I think, there was a group of about 107 that came together and they formulated a letter and said, we want to establish sanctuary in our churches too. They waited for 3 weeks, had a meeting with the cardinal. They presented their position in about 10 minutes. The cardinal turned to the lawyer to his right and said, what do you think? And the lawyer said, no way. And the cardinal said, no, that's dead. That was the extent of what happened around sanctuary in the Catholic Church. We found, on the other hand, that Latino evangelicals, this process of they say Latin America has been invaded 3 times, by the Catholics, by the Protestants, and finally by the evangelicals, all from an imperialist or North American perspective. And so we see a lot of pastors that were recruited in El Salvador and Mexico and other places that brought here, and finance and setting up, and they rode under the wing of these big right-wing white evangelical churches and operations and TV ministries and so forth. But about 40% of their congregations were undocumented. About 10 or 15% of the pastors themselves were undocumented. You know, these are some amazing organizers. You know, the guy coming working in a factory, he starts a Bible study on Wednesday, and 3 years later he got a building and a radio station. You know what I'm saying? That they, you know, they know what they're doing. Well, when we went to them and said, look, no, don't be talking about all this other stuff, and don't say welcome to stranger, because there's nobody stranger than George Bush. This is, you know, you were planted, there was a people planted here by God in order to transform this nation. He said, oh yeah, that's right. You know, that's who we are. You know, we're not strangers, we are the people of God. And they switched, they were muffled when it came to the Trump election, but before then, they really moved, and they moved the white evangelicals. So all of a sudden you have Focus on the Family saying, we're for comprehensive immigration reform. Where did that come from? It came from the fact that in Houston you have a mega church of 7,000 people. They hire one Latino pastor, and there's 3,500 Latinos in their congregation all of a sudden. That growth, that was real power within the overall church. So the Latino evangelicals really represented some. As we began to work with them around the country on this issue and give them, find a forum that they could organize in and so forth, that challenged the Catholics, who were losing a lot of people to the evangelicals. So they had to come forward, and we ended up doing a lot of joint things. And in Providence, they set up a whole operation that's still going today. They took over schools and trained organizers and everything else. So I think we have to change our relationship to the churches and how we evaluate and stuff, because it does, the church does give you independence from all these foundations and stuff that's membership based. So those two things, I think, the question of especially working with the next generation to deal with other issues, survival issues besides, you know, immigration and criminalization. I think we need to look at that. And two, how we deal with the church and evaluating the church as a base from which we can. I mean, look at what do we know about the movement in the 60s? What we know was it was Christian or it was Muslim. You know, we know about King, we know about Malcolm. We didn't know about no not-for-profits. You know what I'm saying? It was church-based, faith-based, and that created a different kind of flexibility.
What do you guys think about sort of the interaction between explicitly faith-based organizations and your own groups, which don't have that same kind of explicit orientation, but obviously a lot of your members are going to be involved in different kinds of faith communities? How do you see that relationship?
Yeah, we do, at least at Centro, we do a lot of work with faith communities, churches, but 100% with him, talking about the Catholic Church as an structure, right? As a body, I mean, I think that there are individuals within the structure of the Catholic Church, like Monsignor Romero, you know, like, but at least in Boston, we don't have one. Nobody. And I think I'm blanking. I don't know if you remember the big raid that took place in Massachusetts and the Michael Bianco in New Bedford. I think it was in 2010, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember us, you know, and other groups asking the Catholic Church, I mean, what's your political position? And they were saying, we can't take a political, and they were quiet. And we said, excuse me, but being quiet, it is a political, you're taking already a political position. Being quiet is, so you're basically, you know, supporting injustice by being quiet, right? By not denouncing what is happening with these communities. And a good example of individuals that are actually challenging not just the status quo or the economic system, political system, but that are already challenging the Catholic Church are Father Solalinda in Mexico, for example. I imagine that you know him, right? He's not just giving shelter and food to the migrants. He's also doing advocacy. He's also challenging the Mexican government, because the Mexican government, with U.S. money, is oppressing undocumented people that are trying to cross, because the U.S. already implemented, that's a legacy, part of the legacy of the Obama administration, the Plan Frontera Sur. I always have problems saying Plan Frontera Sur in English, but That's a program that has been implemented in Mexico since 2011 with U.S. money, right? That is basically a program to externalize the U.S.-Mexican border and criminalize more, undocumented immigrants that are trying to cross. So, and I think that Father Solalinde and many others are doing a lot of work, right? And for example, in Honduras, there is another priest that is actually receiving, death threats because the work that he's doing, right? Working with poor people and campesinos, peasants in Honduras right now. So, but I think that we had to improve that connection, or at least hold accountable the Catholic Church as an instructor, because most of our members go to the Catholic Church on Sunday, right? And on top of that, they also give money to the church, right? And when they need the church, right, the church is not there for them. So, and I think that it's our responsibility to hold the Catholic Church accountable and have better connections with them.
I will say the same thing. I think it's hard. For example, we do organize youth, but a lot of our parents do attend church. My family in general is Catholic, and they attend church every Sunday. Actually, 2 months ago, I went in to try to talk. My brother is one of the people who's in the chorus of the church, and I tried to talk to the father about if SIM could present in terms of like just know your rights in general for the people there, and they said the same thing. We can't be political, but I'm like, I told my brother, like, how can you support people who don't support the community? He's like, God is gonna help us. I'm like, and so I go back, since I also grew up in a Catholic home. I was like, well, God says, help yourself, that'll help you, and then you're not contributing to a community who is, they look up to, they go to church because they want that place where they can heal, they want a place where they feel hope, and you're not giving them hope. You're just like shutting them down from like actually allowing themselves to know what's happening in the community, understand how they still have rights even if they're undocumented. But it's hard to balance that because you do want to build relationships, but it's hard when they do not want to take a political stand.
They are already
Yeah.
taking a political stand.
But I mean, if you in the black community in the '60s, the movement leadership was already in the church. You know what I'm saying? So they understood it and they knew how to work around it. And it's not as if there weren't enormous fights, in the church and so forth. But they knew how to fight, and they knew how not to be alienated altogether, and they knew how to form their own organizational forms that could move forward. I think definitely in El Salvador, in Nicaragua, both. The base communities that came out of liberation theology and went much further than the academics had thought about, they survived even after the parties that came into political power failed. You know what I'm saying? They stayed accountable to the people. They stayed as civics. I just think there really are ways. We just don't have to throw up our hands and say, well, the Catholic Church is sons of bitches, and it's hard to work with them and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? There really are a lot of forms, and we have in this country, in some ways, an easier way. There's so many Catholics that have joined little evangelical churches for a year, and then for another one, then maybe they go back. A lot of them will join an evangelical church, and then when it comes to a baptism, they want to make sure they're in the Catholic book, so they go back and do the baptism at the church. All those things make it possible for us to develop new forms that are based on the struggle, that are based on sound theology, where we can, our folks can take on these bishops and priests and stuff like that on the Bible. They know how to deal with it. One of our, she's now a pastor, when she started out, she said, well, look, I don't know what you're talking about Catholic, but I'm not a Roman. And I think we can, I think it's worth looking at. I think really that, again, in some ways, it's the not-for-profit orientation on the one hand, and two, the kind of secular left that's kept it from moving into developing these kind of formations. I'll leave it to Professor Womack here to talk about a theme that we talk about often. What would have happened if the Mexican Revolution had, instead of fighting the Catholic Church, had been able to take what is, look, you're an organizer, and you go on Sunday, and there's 2,000 people come to the same place every single Sunday and put in money. You know what I'm saying? And you're going to walk away from that? No, you're going to own it. You're going to make it yours. You know what I'm saying? In one way or another. in a lot of ways, the Mexican Revolution had to do with the failure to be able to take, but we can do it here. I do think people shouldn't throw up their hands, and so no investigation, no right to speak.
So I want to kind of circle back to this question of tactics that's come up in one form or another. And Reina, you were talking about sort of how, as new generations of organizers come into SIM, they are, given a certain kind of political education from folks who've been there longer about, your phrase was what works and what doesn't work. So I guess I want to ask all of you, when it comes to this moment that we're living in and the crisis of immigrants' rights, what works and what doesn't work? What are the kinds of strategies that we should be employing? Where should people be focusing their energies? What strategies seemed in an earlier moment, like for example the dreamer narrative of the perfect, sparkly young immigrant to the exclusion of their parents' histories. We now know that doesn't, or not that it doesn't work. It did work, but that it had secondary effects. So what works and what doesn't work? Where should people be focusing their energies right now?
For us, that we work with particularly youth, for us, a key component of our organization is political education. It's like, because the reality is we're young people are not progressive as we want to think. We don't just think a certain believe our beliefs are not just, they're created, they're developed through the organization. And so for us, politicizing our youth in terms of how the policies, each policy that is implemented in Washington will hurt our community in long term. Because we saw that with DACA, a lot of us got DACA, and then what happened, a lot of people got deported. 3 million people got deported out of DACA because of DACA, right? And we, in some way, are in the stage that we are also as well because of the narrative of the DACA, good dreamer versus bad dreamers. And also another thing that's working for us is okay, so you're undocumented. And it goes back to Reverend was saying about if we got papers, let's say in a scenario we got papers. It's not like there's not other forms of oppression. For example, we have groups, people in our organization that identify as part of the LGBTQ community. They have 2 forms of oppression. So we have this thing called identity projects, of where people identify as a woman, what it's like to be a woman in a movement where there's still sexism in a movement, how to as being an undocumented woman outside in the world, experiencing and trying to learn about ways how they navigate that and having a space where they can actually talk. Or undocumented Black people, for example, we know that they're more likely to be deported. So just politicizing that youth and creating a space where we teach people that they're more than undocumented, that there's different other ways of oppressions that they do go through every day, and that the reality is, even if we got papers, it's not going to solve anything, because we're still going to be, a lot of people in my family have papers, and they're still getting minimum wage. So they're still being oppressed, economically. So there's different forms, of oppression, and this is why it's so critical for us to, again, to step away just from immigration and try to politicize the youth to understand the implication of accepting policies that in the long term are going to hurt our in general, the immigrant community.
Yeah, I just want to add 3 things that have been working a little bit for Centro. It's very hard. It is very hard to organize and mobilize the community, because mobilizing is one thing, but organizing, he knows, right? It's different. and political education. So we're trying to do political education beyond electoral work. When I came to the U.S., I heard people talking about political education just based on electoral work. And I heard people talking about democracy, just talking about electoral work. And I said, well, democracy is more than mobilize people to participate, right, in the electoral process. For us, political education is talk with our members about, yes, the structure of the U.S. government, but also talk about the history of Black people in the U.S., talk about racism, talk about what is capitalism, right? All these topics. The other thing is also because our federal government, before Trump, never had the political will to reform and transform the U.S. immigration system. We have been doing a lot of work at the local level because we see a lot of opportunities there. So Centro Presente is responsible, by the way, of that campaign when we passed the TROS Act, that is like, I don't know if you're familiar with that project that now is named Safe Communities Act. So, okay.
This is a great
So
opportunity for education.
I imagine that you're familiar, I hope, with the Secure Communities Program. His. No? You are. Yes. So it was back during the Bush administration, right? If I'm not mistaken, that the Secure Communities Program was implemented by the first time. And you know the city where the Secure Communities was implemented for the first time? Was Boston. So the Secure Communities Program is it's still in place now with another name, but it's like the legal tool that the Obama administration was using to identify, detain, and deport undocumented people from the U.S. So we launched a campaign in 2010 against the Secure Communities Program because the Obama administration was telling us that that program was in place just to deport criminals. However, that was not the reality because most of the people that they were identified and detaining and deporting were people with no criminal convictions. So we found out that there were, some organizations here in Boston that were already having conversations with the local government about that program. So we were like, okay, wait a minute. This program was implemented as a pilot program in Boston during the Menino time, for the first time in the U.S. So we said, no, this is not possible. This program is wrong. So we launched a campaign, and we, after that campaign, we won because Weld Patrick, our progressive governor, was saying, no, we're going to implement the Secure Communities Program. And we're saying, no, we can't. So we launched a campaign, and after that, we were able to elevate, and we were working with some progressive elected officials at the State House, and we launched this campaign to pass the TROS Act. It was not possible because, the leadership of the Democratic Party in Massachusetts, they don't have any desire to support the undocumented immigrants, right? Even when we had the Weld Patrick there, they had the chance to pass this bill to detain, to mitigate the impact of unfair detentions and deportations in our state. And they were not able to do it, right? They were afraid. So that's why we changed our strategy, and we said, let's do work at the local level and try to pass local versions of the TROS Act in municipalities. So that's why we were able to do some work in the city of Somerville because the mayor is very progressive. So we passed a local version of the TROS Act. What it is, that the police is not going to send, right, undocumented people to ICE, right, if they don't have criminal convictions. Very simple and very fair, right? And it's constitutional. It isn't constitutional to hold a person for more than 48 hours if they don't have a criminal background, for Christ's sake, right? That's the only thing that we're asking for, right? And we were able to pass that local version of the TROS Act in Somerville, in the city of Lawrence, and the city of Boston, and that's it. And then we left. But it was hard. Tell you something. The only Latina mayor in Massachusetts, the one in Lawrence, he was against. So we were able to pass that local version of the TROS Act without his support. And now, right? Now he's very proud. Everywhere where he goes, oh, we are a sanctuary city. And I'm like, yeah. And just to let you know, and I was in a meeting with him. I think it was like last year, and I said, I just want to let you know, it was a gigantic auditorium, and I said, just want to let you know that Centro Presente was organizing and the mayor was against. It's on record. No, I think it's important to hold them accountable. So I don't know if I went off the point, but.
Well, that local solutions work, right?
Yeah, they do, and we had to do a lot of work. And the other thing, that's the final, we're also doing a lot of education about the structural reasons behind forced migration, because that is not part of the conversation, and we're like a broken record. Let's talk about what is going on there: structural poverty, violence, corruption, and impunity, and also the role of the U.S. on the implementation of these policies. It's not just about educating our own members, but also educating the general public. Part of the strategy is that we are part of a national coalition, and through that coalition, have been sending delegations to migrant-sending countries like Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. 2 years ago, we sent our own local representative, Adrian Madaro, who represents East Boston. He's a very young guy, from the Democratic Party. And we said, listen, we're going to invite you and see if you want to come to Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And he was afraid. He said, well, my mom is very worried because, El Salvador is dangerous. And I said, it's true, right? And that's where your government is sending our unaccompanied minors back to die, right? So you should go there and see what is going on there. And have conversations, not just with members of the government, but also have conversations with civil society organizations that are working with the people there. So it was very hard to convince him, but in the end, he agreed. So now he's proud also. Everywhere where he goes, and I was in Mexico and blah, blah, blah. But I think it's important because last year, we actually had a meeting with him and said, listen, you know what's going on with TPS, help us. We're trying to pass a statewide resolution to support people with TPS. He was afraid. I think he's going to be angry as I said this, but he knows me. He goes, and I said, listen, this is only a statement. This is not public policy, right? So, but he's the main sponsor of a resolution, a statewide resolution that we were able to pass last year in support of people with TPS, protected under TPS. So it was the first resolution at the national level, but it was symbolic because we're not changing public policy, but I think that we're trying to change the public discourse about immigrants and immigration, and we're also educating people about what is going on in El Salvador and Honduras.
When we think those are all good things. We work in parallel in a lot of ways in terms of how we work on things, but I just think we may have to revise our thinking a little bit. We've existed since, the 80s, really, in a climate where even though there was kind of rabid anti-immigrant feelings and there was different things like that, and the 1996 law and everything and stuff like that, we knew that basically capital in this country wanted immigrant labor. So it never got too far, not too crazy. I'm not convinced that we haven't crossed the line, that the political situation now, the way that those who are in power got to power and will keep power, may create a whole different situation. If after this little session in Congress is over, which is really kind of just something that Trump had to get out of the way of, one way or the other, suppose they deport 2 million people a year. You know what that looks like in our communities? You know what it looks like when they're coming in and busting in factories and busting in homes and following people through and stuff like that, and where they're able to enlist a lot of police forces around the country, really as agents and stuff like that. It changes the whole character of what's going on in this country. We think the people that run around and talk about fascism are a bunch of nuts and stuff like that. But look, we could face a very severe repression here, and it could kick off as soon as June. His budget calls for another 4,000 or 5,000 ICE agents. They're already, when I took the train over here, they were already going through the train asking for papers. They're on my block, out in front of my church, lining young ICE agents are up because we're a sanctuary city. So the ICE agents come in, they were lining people up and checking papers. We could, I just think we have to keep in mind that we really may be in a fight for our lives and for the existence of how we function here and stuff like that. And in that case, we will never stop the drive for political education and the other things and the change things that we can do. There's some legal work. The California decision on DACA represented a due process concept that we're trying in other areas that may pay some fruit. It basically just said, if the government promises you something and you take advantage of those promises to stake your life on it, they can't just change it overnight, stuff like that. So they may have something here. Two, we may be able to mobilize seriously to force Trump, like for instance, to extend DACA. That could happen. That's the basis there to do that. But basically, we're going to be in a different type situation, guys. Sanctuary, the first sanctuary action we took was to go factory by factory, come with a skit, and show people what to do when the raids came, that how they could have a warning system set up, how they could hide the people that didn't have papers, how they could obstruct the ICE agents, including throw down on them if they had to. And you know what I'm saying? That's sanctuary. It's not legal. Sanctuary is not legal. After Elvira's sanctuary, we got called to a meeting in Washington, D.C. They wanted to set up something called the New Sanctuary Coalition. I think you got something in Boston like that, right? The first thing that they did was hire a bunch of lawyers to tell them what they could do and what they couldn't do. Sanctuary is not legal. There's nothing legal about sanctuary. We have to get over that. You know, everybody wants to talk about it wasn't it's to Boston, for Christ's sake, from Mississippi, the Underground Railroad. Wasn't that good? You think that the people that forged papers, we need forged papers. You know what I'm saying? That's big stuff in it. You know, it's more difficult, but it's, you know, there are more possible. That's not legal. You know what I'm saying? We need to be able to hide people. We need to be able to obstruct. Those are actions of civil disobedience. And sanctuary is basically a movement of civil disobedience, not just for defense, but in order to stimulate mass mobilization. We were able to get to mass mobilizations in 2007 because of the civil disobedient actions that led up to it, that brought people to a higher level, that were more conscious. And in the long run, if we're not able to mobilize in large numbers, number one, think about 2016. Trump went across this country in every single state with mobilizations and demonstrations of 25 and 35 and 40,000 people. The Clinton campaign, I don't think ever had a meeting with more than 150 people. And they had a whole nother different way to campaign that they thought was digitalized and was going to work, and it didn't work. You cannot achieve an electoral victory in terms of these current conditions that we're fighting in unless you first have a popular mobilization that's not electoral. So we need big mobilizations if we're going to make any gains to defend ourselves coming up. But in the long run, if you want to do political education in terms of how the system works and how what this is and so forth like that, and relationship to Latin America, you can do it so much more quickly when somebody has left their home and is marching someplace, or when you're sitting in a jail cell with them and stuff like that. That it happens very fast. We have to be in the struggle because it's the best way to organize people, but mainly because we may have to. You know what I'm saying? This may be a necessity. We don't know exactly what this next move in the United States of America looks like. It looks very scary to me. And it looks to me that there are forces in place. There's a militarization. The military is totally unopposed. There is no anti-militarization campaign in this country left. That's very scary in terms of what they could do if they decide to move. And immigration will be the issue. It's the immigrant that will kick it off. The only way we can defend ourselves is to be able to mobilize. There is a fusion movement in this country that I think is very important. I think the work of what the bishop is doing out of North Carolina is very important. And I think it was exciting to me, the truth is, given the historical perspective I have, when the women's movement embraced the fight against deportation. That's a big deal. You know what I'm saying? That's not, you know, that's new for that kind of, you know, for all these movements, the LGBT movement, all those together. That means that in our organizations that are based in the undocumented communities, we have to participate in all those things. We have to participate because you don't get back unless you give, and you got to be part of this kind of fusion movement that's growing. So those are things that are necessary. I just think as much as we spend our day-to-day work every day on 20 people here and 10 people here and political education here and a local project here and stuff like that, I mean, it's very important that we're a sanctuary city in Chicago. That was a good move to make. It doesn't stop everything, but it stopped a whole lot of stuff. You know, we can actually, because of what we did at the county, we can actually get somebody out of the county jail when they were being held on a DUI or something like that before they get deported. Those are important defensive things, but most of the stuff that we do is just not legal.
we got to get in our minds, lawyers don't run our movement. Lawyers don't run our movement. It's good to know the law, use them where we have to, but sanctuary is a movement of resistance, and it's not legal. You can't be legal if you're fighting an unjust law. In the long run, it's not going to work.
Yeah, kudos to that. So, our time is going by so quickly. I want to see if any of you all have questions for our panelists. I'll bring a microphone. Well, the microphone will then capture your question for our video recording. So,
really quick. Can you talk about the role of the media in the fight?
can we take a couple questions? Do other folks have questions too? I'm going to take a group of questions.
Similarly, thank you for sharing your experience and the experience of your mother. What can those of us who are either in the media or academics do to help amplify stories like the story of your mother? And how would you have us be talking about that very difficult issue of separating off the dreamers from other people who have every right to residency?
Anyone else have? Yeah.
Thanks so much for the panel. I just had a question about kind of the last point, like on the strategies, like what works and what doesn't work. I really agree that what we need, or one of the things that we need, is more protest and demonstrations. I feel like since DACA was repealed or was said that it was, when Trump pulled it out in September, like there have been small demonstrations of up to a couple thousand, but we haven't seen some of the mass demonstrations like what we saw in 2006 against the Sensenbrenner bill, and that was even mostly immigrants who protested in 2006. But I feel like now a lot more U.S.-born, working class people would come out to support as well. So I guess I'm wondering, we got 3 weeks until March 5th. Can we build for demonstrations in Boston, in the greater Boston area? Getting out and really getting back to the basics of pounding the pavement, handing out flyers, hanging up posters. There's a lot of fear, but we have strength in numbers. And then just the last thing is there's this, the Teamsters in New York City, a Teamsters local, it's 120,000 members, and they've just declared that they're becoming a sanctuary union because one of their members got deported at just a regular immigration check-in. And so the union, a bunch of, majority white blue-collar workers have decided their slogan is union solidarity first, immigration status second. And I think that's something that if we can get, the general, the labor movement in Boston to take up, we could have a lot of strength. But I feel like demonstrations on top of political education is really important. And I'm wondering what panelists think.
I could answer that question about my mom. I think it is important to highlight the contributions that immigrants make in this country, because it is a huge contribution, but it is also, I feel like, also stepping away from that narrative, because that just tells us that we had to do something in order to be deserving to be in this country. And the way I see it is you deserve to be here because you're a human being that deserves to live with dignity and respect. And that should be it. That should be the message that people should take in. The fact that we shouldn't make, not excuses, but facts about why people deserve to live and not go home back to El Salvador and potentially be murdered. That's it.
No potential, they are being.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay, don't worry, it's true.
There's a lot of stuff out there. The media, complicated situation. We not only have our own social media and everything like that, which we need to get better at and more organized and stuff like that. But listen, Latino media is, there's two different medias in this country. You watch Univision or Telemundo and stuff, and 95% of what's on there won't be on the English media, and vice versa. And in terms of the issues that concern us around immigration and so forth like that, we're at the top of the news every day. You know what I'm saying? But, they come to us 3 or 4 times a week. Well, can you give us? We're looking into this. Can you provide the faces for this and show me the perspective and stuff like that? We were at the marches that happened in 2006 and 2007 started in the Univision radio stations. Now it's been reorganized, and there were some bad moves against us after that, but that's what made it move. And then finally, by May Day, they had moved into Univision Television. They organized the goddamn demonstration. We have our own media, you know what I'm saying? And we have to spend a little more time making sure that we have control of Spanish language media. That it's an independent force, even though it's been bought. You know what I'm saying? You've got NBC that's taken over Telemundo and so forth like that. Even within all that, we have ability to hold that media accountable and support it, and we should. So what you can do with the MSNBCs of the world, I don't really know. But I do think that every year, for a while, we did this as a movement, regardless of organizations and coalitions or forever. We forged a consensus in terms of what mass mobilizations we were going to work on. We had dates, and we had themes, and this is how we're going to go. And we did that. We met in a lot of different ways in different coalitions, and people went in between different things and stuff like that. But the movement to stop the deportations forged the consensus on mass mobilization every single year until about 3 years ago. And I think we have to return to that. If we can get through these little fund-based divisions and stuff like that, and talk to each other, then I think that we can. I love this, what the Teamsters are doing, that's real exciting. These are Teamsters, Lord have mercy. The first thing the goddamn International did was to come in and give them the lawyers to tell them what they could do and what they couldn't do. You don't need a bunch of lawyers to tell Teamsters how to deal with some guy that's going to come in and rip off your brother. You know what I'm saying? That it didn't make no sense to me. So but it's a beautiful concept, and I think we have, there are a lot of SEIU locals that are already doing that. They're just not publicizing and stuff, but they really are sanctuary locals, and but we just got to do our work. That's all. But the consensus around mobilization every year, I think, is something that we should do.
Obviously, the media is run by corporations, and most of them already have a political view about stuff, and they don't really care about talking about the real issues, right? Talking about international, everybody knows what is going on in Venezuela, right? Because the only country government who is violating human rights is Venezuela. Everywhere else, everything is okay in Latin America, according to the press, right? And that's not true. And right, and that's because ideological issues and because the press is controlled by corporations, right? And the other thing about the unions, I think it's really good what they are doing, but I would like to see the unions doing more education, educating white workers about the struggle that Latino workers are facing, because I don't think that they have those connections. They are building those connections. I don't think that a lot of poor white people that are in unions have a good understanding about the struggle that undocumented people have. That's what I think, and I don't see the unions doing that, to be honest. I see unions, some unions, and I'm not going to criticize all of them, but some of them are actually defending the muro, the wall, saying, oh, we need jobs. I'm so sorry, but what kind of jobs, right? So, the mobilizations, I think that we need definitely mobilizations, but we also need to have like a more, like a conversation, right, between undocumented people and also people from the U.S., the allies that are like supporting the community, right, and have that agreement, because we would like to see the movement being run by people that are being affected and supported by white people that are progressive, working with the community, not speaking for the community, right? So I think it's very important.
So just to follow up on that, Rachel's question about sort of what should academics, what should people who, U.S. citizen, people who think of themselves as allies, what should folks be doing? What would you want this room full of people to do? What would you want Harvard students, Harvard professors and students from other area universities to do to be useful in this moment? One is to put bodies on the line, right? This is Slim's point about civil disobedience. Mm-hmm. What else?
I think it's not just about just a lot of us, because I'm not an ally, I'm undocumented. But a lot of people, for example, we do have allies and organizations that are supported with undocumented people. But, sometimes they question when we are doing something too radical, and then they're like, oh, you can't do it like this because it's gonna, people are not gonna support you. So, making sure to, as an ally, to support the decisions undocumented people take that think that they're gonna be able to help the community. And another thing is, if you know that people have a certain perception about undocumented people or immigrants in general, like challenge that. Don't be afraid. Even if your family members, because that's how it starts, you educating and bringing that knowledge to your households. And, you know, just don't go to spaces where undocumented people are and just say, okay, I support you, but go out and then not do anything about it, right? Because then that's not helping us at all.
Anyone else have questions?
I just want to add something.
Oh yeah, you
about
go
that.
ahead. I'll bring you a
Yeah.
microphone.
There are many things that people can do, and it's very hard because every time that we go to places, you know, schools, churches, the most important question is, okay, all these problems, what can I do, right? But there are many things that you can do. Be more connected with the organizations that are working with the community. I think it's very important. Having these spaces, I think it's also important. Hold accountable the local governments. Sometimes people have no idea about what is going on at the State House. And I think it's important because we always focus on what is going on in Washington, but we have no idea about what is going on in Massachusetts. We always say we're progressive, we're fighting Massachusetts. That's not true. And I think it's important to understand the local dynamic and what is going on at the state level. You can also give money. You can also educate your own family, because we receive a lot of volunteers that come from Harvard and say, oh, I'm here because I want to organize the community. You also can organize your own community, right? Because the right wing is organizing your own community, your own family, right? And I think that's very important. Go to the suburbios, and educate your own families about what is going on with our communities. Come with us to visit Latin America. Hold accountable the Democratic Party. It's not just about the Republican Party. I am not a big fan of Hillary Clinton, I'm sorry, but she was a supporter of a coup d'etat in my own country. So I hate to see, I'm sorry, but it's not, this is not about gender, this is about human rights. She was the head of the I'm blanking. State Department, thank you. When the coup d'etat took place in my country, nobody knows about that because the media is controlled, right? And I think it's important to hold accountable that party. Yeah, and you can do it better than us.
Okay, I'm going to take a last group of questions, and then we'll have final responses from each of our panelists.
A quick question about unions and this question that is on our minds. There are certain unions that deal and have members, like a little like churches, that are disproportionately numerous in immigrants of this endangered status. Teachers, healthcare workers, come immediately to mind, and some of them have very strong unions. And I wondered if you can comment on how your organization has been able to work with any of those kinds of service workers, in effect. I mean, it's tremendous if you could get the Teamsters or some industrially strategic union to come out for this, but short of that, you have citywide strategic, socially, politically strategic unions that could work on this. And so, from any experience, briefly.
Mm-hmm. Here, I'm going to pick up a couple other questions, and then I saw it. Yes. Okay.
Hi. So. What do you think schools and colleges in Massachusetts should be doing to facilitate immigrant students' concerns?
So what should Massachusetts schools and universities be doing to facilitate immigrant students' concerns?
And I wonder if we could talk a little bit more also about, we talked about white workers and how they don't necessarily know what's going on with immigrants. So how do we unite everybody so we're all fighting the same fight in a sense? Because if somehow, you know, we put up a wall and we have fewer immigrants, well, other people are going to get oppressed instead, because we're in this capitalist, imperialist system where there has to be someone at the bottom of the totem pole. So can we talk about that?
Hi, thank you all so much. I have two quick questions. The first is thinking about this question of like, what is the model, right, for organizing? What is the institutional form that we should be trying to build? And so the question is, do these rapid response networks that are being constructed in different cities provide a way to sort of begin organizing outside of any particular NGO or any particular organization, rather on like an issue basis? Or is that too ad hoc to have long-term sustainability? And then the second question is, Reverend, I actually was super lucky to visit you at your space at Paseo Boricua with Oscar Rivera when he got out. And I remember one of the things that really struck me was the way that a lot of different organizations on Paseo Boricua were sort of unified in the same political direction. For instance, you have like a clinic, you have a school, you have a place of worship, there's multiple businesses, and you're building a sort of ecosystem of different community service organizations that are all unified by the same political direction. And I'm wondering if you could just refresh my memory a bit about how that was built up, because that seems like a really useful model too. So thank you so much.
Okay, so respond to all components of those questions that you like. We have about 5 minutes left.
The college part, like definitely having spaces here like this where people can come and get informed about what's happening locally. But another thing is like having sustainable like support for undocumented people, but that means like we have worked with universities who are like, yeah, send someone here and present and, you know, even create a scholarship, but then we leave and then they're like, forget that undocumented people exist. And it's like, do we really need to do all the work for you? Like, can you be supported that way as well? Like, if we actually have the time, take the time to go to our university and try to like talk to the administration about what to do with undocumented people when they are met with undocumented people, and sort of create the undocumented friendly space for them, like, you know, like to also help create that precedent, not just for the moment speak about it and then forget once we leave that place, because then that's what the allies are for, right? Like, you know, to help us create a space where it's sustainable and it's not just for a certain amount of time where like, okay, the hot issue right now is undocumented people. Like, okay, no one's talking about them, so let's forget about them. So, yeah.
Slim, closing word?
You know, whenever a movement's starting, whenever you're dealing with grievances and problems and so forth, you look for guidance, you look for direction, you look for people to know what they're doing and have done something before and so forth. In the 1960s, we looked to the liberation struggles around the world. The African American movement looked to the African struggles, and Latinos looked to struggles throughout Latin America, led by Cuba at that time and so forth. The form of organizations that we formed were not-for-profits. They were organizations that tried to figure out how do we pursue the struggle. We had an amazing, really, movement from labor when we did I forgot what year it was, when we did the cross the country piece here and stuff like that. It was beautiful. We're all in buses and went from city to city, and you had white construction workers that were standing up and meet us in Philadelphia and said, we're for the undocumented. I mean, we had a lot of unions, the trade unions, it wasn't just SEIU and stuff, it really was the trade union. We didn't follow up on it, it was over. You know what I'm saying? Once it had been done, it was over, because there's no organization that says every day, where's our strategy? How are we dealing with this group? How are we dealing with the churches? How are we dealing with the unions? How are we dealing with, you know what I'm saying? That's planning that out. What you see between the flags, came out of that. It really, that's 40 years developing, where people said, everything that we do, we have to have at least a group that's got its fingers everywhere, and that comes together and says, look, how do we mesh all these things? What needs to be done here because we're doing this here and so forth, and then makes an analysis and moves and stuff like that. We don't have that form of organization. That's a serious problem. In some ways, I really do feel like the invasion of the funders and the not-for-profits and the government funding stuff has created another model which keeps us looking at everything segregated and segmented. It doesn't show us how to move in a lot of different directions at the same time. And I think that's a real problem. I think I think we're in serious trouble, guys. I really do. I don't think this is a slow time. I think this is gonna be a fast time, and I think we're gonna get our ass kicked here very quickly. And we're gonna see a radical change in this country. I think that's what's coming. Hope I'm wrong, but I think that's what's happening. So it's not like we have time to go, you know, have a retreat in Sweden and try to figure all this stuff out and start a new organization and stuff like that. You know, we're running as fast as we can and moving as fast as we can. But at least we gotta talk to each other a little bit more than, well, this is my thing and this is your thing, cool, I'll help you if you help me, blah, blah, blah. We got to sit down and say, let's spend a little time in analysis of what the next step is here. I mean, these were great summits when we were able to develop consensus around mass mobilization nationally every single year for about 5 years. You know what I'm saying? That wasn't wonderful, big, and so, you know, but it happened. Not happening now. Not happening now. It's not in the cards because people are really not thinking about building a unified movement here. There's a lot of agreement out there, even in people that are part of organizations that we don't like. There's still agreement with them and stuff like that. But the perspective of you don't develop. There's no such thing as a single issue type movement and stuff like that. You know, or a single constituency. You got to find something from everywhere. You know, the universities. We need to have the discussions. I mean, there's some projects that we think we can deal with Harvard and stuff. They have some expertise and some resources to make some things move in terms of an educational program we want to do. Well, listen, you got people at Harvard that are connected with labor in ways that we're not connected with labor, and we should be working with them. You know what I'm saying? There are really a lot of things, but it's a question. I don't know how to put this simply because we're not going to take time and build a new liberation party in the United States of America. We don't have that time, I don't think, and we don't have the people with the will to do anything like that. But we at least got to begin to talk with each other. One of the things the universities can do is some things like this. They can create some space in which some of these discussions can be convened, and where we can begin to look at different aspects of the struggle that need to be coordinated and understood better, and we can begin to even informally begin to get a division of labor about the work that has to be done.
I think I already said, but sorry. Yeah, people get mad when I said this, but we don't have a movement in Massachusetts. We have a lot of organizations that are sometimes working on silos, but we don't have a clear collective strategy to fight for immigrant rights in Massachusetts. For the past 10 years, we have been trying to pass something with no success. Clearly, because two things, because the leadership of the Democratic Party had no political will to do anything to support undocumented people in Massachusetts, and second, because we don't have, as civil society organizations, a clear and collected strategy to fight back. Two things, very simple, and at the same time, very complicated, right? And I think that I echo what Reverend Coleman was saying about creating these spaces to talk about that, you know, because we need to challenge the status quo in Massachusetts. We need to challenge the schools. We need to challenge the State House. People are saying that, oh, we're not able to pass something in Massachusetts because we have a Republican there. That's completely is a lie, right? So, and I think that we need to start building and talking about educating white workers. I think it's important. I don't think it's our role to do that. We try to do it. I think it's your role to do that. I think it's the role of the unions to do that. Use us as an example. And there is a difference because obviously the economic system is oppressing poor white people too. But it's a difference because we're not white. You know, I am a U.S. citizen, but hello, you know, I'm not white. You know, people can say, "Are you an illegal?" You know, do you have a green card? Whatever. So there is an issue about race, right? So education. Educate your students about what is going on with the immigrant community. Educate your students about what the U.S. have been doing for decades there. Educate about what Hillary Clinton was doing in 2009 in my own country, you know? I think that is very important. If you educate people, education is power, you know? I learned, I was a kid during the 80s, and I remember watching TV with my dad. And I asked, why are they killing them? And my dad said, because they are not terrorists, because they are communists, you know? And then I went to school and I learned, shit, I'm sorry. It was because they were fighting for something good, you know? So, and it's happening right now in my own country, and the U.S. is supporting that, and I'm so mad. You know, I'm so mad because with the U.S. money, they are killing my own people that are fighting for justice in my own country. And I would like to see more people from the U.S. mad with your own government. I think that's important. I don't think that if you don't understand your history, you're not going to be able to help us, because we can give papers to the 12 million people that are undocumented in the U.S. But if this machine that the U.S. is putting in place in our own countries of origin is still there, you're going to have more millions coming from Central America and Mexico.
All right, lots of work to be done. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to our